Now we have a basic idea of where we're starting and the general landscape around the Drowning Tuna. For the next part of the bottom-up world building, we'll be focusing on the Dwarven City we established on the coast from Designing a World Part 1. So if you weren't there for that, you should probably go listen to that one first, because we're jumping right into the next phase tonight on Playing God. Those who are new and didn't listen to my last sentence should know I'm your host, Nicologi, and joining me is Xander, let me do a backflip, Nolan.
Hey, man.
In this episode, we're going to focus on just the Dwarven City, because with this style of development, you need to intentionally keep your focus constrained. Xander, why don't you go through and tell us what we'll be establishing in our world by the end of tonight's episode?
Well, the first thing that we're going to be looking at is the city itself. What kind of structure is it? Does it have walls? Does it not? Things like that. The territory that the city rules. The races that exist within it and in the surrounding areas. The customs, religions, or cults in some instances. The laws and the basics of bringing life into a city.
All right, and this time I actually have Roll20 up, unlike last time, which was clearly a bluff. And so what you're going to see on the screen and what we're going to describe verbally are going to be as close as we can get them together. Since we're focusing our constraints to just a singular city, I've drawn a circle, a poorly drawn circle, despite there being a tool for me to just draw a shape. And this is going to represent our city, where we're focusing in on this time. So Xander, why don't we start by naming this Dwarven City? What should we call it?
I am bad with naming things. I usually use a generator or something. You want me to pull up a generator for this one?
No, let's come up with something. How about we call it the Iron Coast?
Ooh, I like that. Iron Coast. The city
Yeah,
of the
City
Iron
of the
Coast.
Iron Coast. We'll go with that. So, as we established last time, this city is to the east of our starting point, which is the Drowning Tuna. Comparatively, it is but a small blip out there in the wilderness next to the city. And we had a road that was established leading from this city next to the tuna and then onwards. And then further into the mountains, but we're not going to talk about those. We're only going to talk about the city of the Iron Coast.
Speaking of coast, if you're wanting to draw a map that is legitimately going to give you a little bit of feel to the world, you should draw a map.
Oh yes, I should have put the coast in. Considering we are on the coast, we've established that the dwarves are a somewhat seafaring people. They at least have harbors and other things that would allow them to access. This isn't just a sea, right? This isn't like a huge ocean.
Yeah, just a sea, kind of like Lake Michigan,
Okay.
sort of.
All right. So, first of all, how far out does the territory of this town consist of? Like, this is their direct sphere of influence. This isn't talking about the entire land of the dwarves. We're not to that scale yet. This is just how far out are the people protected from, like, the walls of the city? Or is it only constrained within these walls where you could truly count this as the city itself? Do they even care about what's going around in the immediate vicinity?
Well, given the comparative size of the city versus where the Drowning Tuna is, if it's a couple hours worth of walking, or a few hours on horseback, if we denote that, it's likely that they would have a rather large sphere of influence because, unlike the city itself, you can't grow crops within the walls, so it's likely that the farmland for our rolling plains would be under the quote-unquote crown's protection as well.
Okay,
So it would be fairly sizable.
let's put those rolling planes out there with poorly drawn squiggly lines. This is why you don't need the visual, because I am not an artist. All right, so
Yeah,
they have the surrounding area. How many miles out would you say that is?
Well, considering the Drowning Tuna is the last stop before heading into like the mountainous regions that we just established last time, let's say it's 20 miles. That's about how far you could get with a good day's ride on a horse. and it's a couple of days on foot if you're taking it fairly slow. But it's not an insurmountable amount of space. It's easy to bring supplies in, and it's easy to keep a rather large sphere. So I would say about 20 miles from the city's wall to the
Okay,
tuna.
all right, that's good. So we could kind of establish more about what's in there later, but the reason why we wanted to expand what the maximum territory is because that gives us like our total scope of just the city. And one of the important reasons why we're picking a city as this first point of contact with the players, this will establish a lot of the cultures that are coming later on in the game, or immediately, or even showcase like maybe something that the players came up with how their backstories for their characters were made. It's very easy to put that kind of stuff into a city, and this way you have like a lot of area for adventuring and other possible intrigue. Without having to rely on very many random encounters or just trying to get the players from point A to point B. Because within a city, that's much more doable than if you're trying to cross like a vast wilderness where you have to roll like every few miles of some random encounter that you show up.
Yeah, it's a fairly large area where you're not going to come into a lot, but I would imagine there's probably some stands of trees and things like that for wild game. Probably herds of sheep and cattle that are kept by several farmers who both butcher them and sell them to the people of the city of the Iron Coast.
So we got farmland and cattle stretching out about like outside the walls, just pretty much most of that area.
About 20 miles or so, both north, south, and west toward the mountains.
We've already established that the dwarves are on top in this city. They're clearly the ones who established the city to begin with, just based on the name that we've come up with. But what other races can we find here before we talk about any of the intricacies, or anything between the two? What can we find here, Xander?
Well, before we figure out what, did we establish whether or not these people are kind of closed off and I can't think of the
well, that's
word
why I'm
for it.
asking what first, because if we know who our players are, we could position our actors better. So because then we could decide afterwards if we want these races to be like a certain way, and if we go through step by step, then with each race we could do something different for them, which keeps them each interesting. And so that way it's like if your players go to, if we divided this up in districts, for instance, if they go to like the halfling district, it'll look way different and like have a different interactability with like the elven district or the humans or the dwarves themselves.
Well, considering we've already established a bit of a high magic setting, it's likely that the people would be more quote-unquote inclusive. There would probably be districts of different. So I'd say there's probably elves, definitely humans. They exist just about everywhere. Probably some halflings, because they pretty much exist just about everywhere as well. No gnomes. Gnomes are out.
All right.
There are no gnomes. Dwarves don't like gnomes in this world.
Okay, so dwarves don't like gnomes. Okay, we could do that.
Yeah, poor Keljan.
So, all right, so we've listed a few. We can pause there for now. We don't have to worry about like anything more detailed than just what we kind of have at play. Because as we think more on it, we could always say like, since this is a capital city, clearly there's going to be like a smattering of other races and cultures and whatever you could possibly think of coming in at some point. Yeah. So there's going to be a small percentage of that no matter what. But we have the major players for what's going on here. So what if maybe like if we intermingle everybody except the dwarves as a possibility? Maybe they have their own section. Maybe they don't really, since they already don't like gnomes, that's a hard no on the gnomes. They're only really tolerating the others that are here, so they kind of all live together outside of like the dwarven center, possibly.
I'd say, yeah. I would say that the center of the city would likely be the most defensible, and therefore that's where the dwarves would probably live. Uh,
This is a fantasy world. I don't really. When I'm doing this, I don't particularly care about how defensible things are. And the reason why, especially Xander, I think of this is because it's a fantasy world. Defensibility doesn't mean so much when you can teleport places, or when dragons don't care about your walls and they fly over them and just blow your ass up.
yeah.
Yeah, wall doesn't really keep out the giant flying tyrant that can shoot fireballs out of its face.
Yeah,
But
that's
but
not
if we,
gonna
I,
tell.
like the idea of them in the center anyway, just because I think that's like, it's just cool. You have them right in the center. How
Yeah.
about they have like maybe this huge spire that actually extends deep into the crust of the earth and like just houses like a
Ooh,
shitload of dwarves. Like it's kind of like a hive city or something.
sweet. I like
All
that.
right,
That
I'm
sounds
gonna
cool.
draw what I
Um,
hope doesn't look like a penis, and it's probably gonna fail miserably. But I'm basically just drawing like this tower that's gonna extend deeper into the ground. And yes, I know I just scribbled over my own words. And then maybe like it branches out. This is like under the crust or something. The dwarves have like access to their underground mines. Maybe this is like a direct access way. This is how they prevent other people from showing up and taking their goods.
hey, there you go. That's a
So
good
this
way
is
to
like
do
a
it.
main mine shaft. All right, that's cool.
Cool, cool. All right, so we've established a large tower with kind of mine-like structure beneath it, much like a hive of ants, sorta. I think the central district would be fairly small because they are upward and downward, so there wouldn't be a lot of land
So like
there.
that
And
size where it's like it's a big enough chunk where they do have a lot of like open space within the walls, but you could see the majority of the city is actually dedicated to everybody else.
yeah, and then rather than having like dedicated walls for different districts, it's just kind of an intermingling. And as you go around the circle, the architecture changes slightly and kind of melds into the next, rather than being hard lines.
It's like you like the races generally congregate together after a certain extent simply because of familial ties and everything, but obviously
Yeah,
they're just spread out. So there's like maybe an area of the city that was predominantly built by elves, but then like humans moved in or something at some point, and maybe like you got a human living in an elven house, and like a halfling who's bought a quote unquote mansion of a human house over on like the north side or something like
yeah,
that.
that'd be cool. All right, so now that we have the people that are likely there, the general feel for what the city would look like. Now I think we should run into what kind of customs can we find here, since it's intermingling, much like the United States. If I figure it would be uh, celebrations that kind of meld different belief structures based on the races into kind of one sort of amalgamation that is kind of blended together over the centuries.
Yeah, I mean that seems reasonable. What kind of things would you be referencing with this?
Well, there would likely be temples scattered throughout the city to each of the gods that deal with each of their races. But beyond that, things like festivals and points in time during the year where people gather together to celebrate certain things, like a harvest festival or spring festival or winter solstice, summer solstice, things like that, would borrow things like, let's say, gift giving was something that's a uniquely human trait in most other places, but it's become custom in this city and in this province that even the elves and the halflings give gifts amongst their families, while the elves celebrate the longest night of the year as a patron to the dark magics that exist within the world, sort of thing. Uh, they would have something much like Halloween, but in the middle of winter.
Right. All right. So these are all good ideas. But my follow-up question is: so how do these interact with the players? Because at the end of the day, we could come up with the coolest fantasy system in the universe, and if no one's around to play it, Does it make a sound?
The way I've always thought about it is, depending on the time of year the players are beginning the game, depends on what kinds of things they might come across. So there's four major points throughout the year that represent the solstices.
So you're
Um,
basically just
and
saying straight up put the festivals in play and have them interact with it.
Precisely, because when they get to do cool things and interact with things like that, they're more likely to absorb a culture, especially if, like, say the elf comes from a land far to the south that's just nothing but elves, and one of their kinsmen who happen to live in the city buys them a gift for this particular season, and they're looking like, "Wait, why are you giving me this?" "Oh, it's a custom here to give gifts. It's something that we've picked up over
Ah,
the years."
okay.
It
I
kind
can
of
see that.
creates intricacies amongst the player characters.
Okay.
And I love festivals and things like that
Yeah, it's a good way
in
to introduce
in D&D
NPCs.
games. Oh,
Like
it's
you
a
could
wonderful
always
way.
put some kind of turmoil that's going on because festivals always attract unscrupulous types. So you could do
Yeah.
as simple of an encounter as like a purse snatching scene, or perhaps even as complex as a conspiratorial murder that's taking place on the streets because nobody's going to notice one person who passed out drunk on the side of the road and maybe had a few more stab wounds in him than anybody would notice immediately.
Yeah, perhaps not. Festivals are a great time for charlatans to take advantage of people and ply their trade. All right, so we have a little bit of the culture. What's what's something this place is known for?
Ah, that's a good
Like,
question.
yeah, like Chicago's known for their hot dogs and
Well,
their pizzas, and so is New York. Like, what's this
all right.
place's
I think
thing?
that we should really lean into the high fantasy aspect of this. So I think that they're off the coast, the Iron Coast. It's called that for more than one reason, and one of the primary things is because they have maybe like this sea life, maybe like a clam or something similar that not only can produce maybe like regular old pearls, but could also like condense to form like pure geodes of valuable like rocks or other things that the dwarves would be interested
Ooh,
in, which is
nice.
why they set up the town here to begin with, because they saw that and were like, oh, hell yeah, we're going to get in on that shit. And next thing you know, there's a
That's
capital.
awesome. All right,
So
so
we're going to have magic clams,
okay, and
which
that
we could also make a
because it
monster out of that. Like, this could be a dangerous thing, like a CR5 piece of shit who just has, like, tentacles and, like, laser beams that it could shoot underwater.
yeah. So a guy is like, I need to get this clam, but I've got to, like, the guys that I had got killed because this is a
Or the
pretty tough
clams
one,
get stronger the
and
more valuable the thing inside of it is. Like if they
yeah,
condense it to like a
Moby Dick.
pure diamond or something like that, then it's like a fucking huge clam, and it's like a CR-15 thing that the players can end up fighting and have like get a shitload of riches off of.
Yeah, eventually, kind of like how the whole dragon horde thing works. It doesn't have to be a dragon;
I
it
think
can
I'm
be
gonna
a
stat
clam,
this thing out because
and it's got
I
a
like
horde.
the idea of this clam. We're not doing that this episode though.
Now, so because the clam is such a vital part of the reason why the city was built, it's also likely that, just like every other city in the world, they have a specialty food that is unique to the place that they live, and people try to recreate it everywhere
Mhm.
else. So maybe it's like a once a year at midsummer, there's like a clam boil where people go out, they fish for their own clams, some small, some of the big ones, like they hold record breaking weights that where they weigh the giant clams that brave fishermen have gone out, cracked open, and they're weighing the meat to be sliced up and distributed to the people during this festival. So it's clam.
All right, we could have that in there. We don't want to restrict ourselves to just focusing on like one thing because we could always add like maybe another sea critter, or maybe there's some kind of thing that flies in the air around here.
Ooh, maybe,
Maybe
maybe.
off the a little bit off the coast, we have like some spike-like rocks that are just jutting out of the water that have a flock of unidentifiable birds in the distance, and who knows what those
Yeah.
are? Those could be an adventure in and of themselves.
Yeah, they could actually be the natural predator of the clams, like a rock or something like that. Really big, huge
Oh, dude,
birds.
that would be scary if you just said like, "Oh, look at those little birds in the distance," and like on those rocks, and then you get closer and closer, and it's like, I thought this was a little shorter distance, and then you get closer, and you're like, "Oh, those are a bit bigger than I thought they were," and then you get right up on it, and you're like,
It's
"Oh
like,
no."
this is bad. Yeah, so it produces a problem. So maybe the players are asked by the crown to come back at some point in time because the rocks have gotten out of control, and that gives them the ability to come back to a city that they started out in, kind of create a point of nostalgia, like when we go back to Moonlight Harbor in your game. Like it's like, oh, we're going to go and see this place again, and tomorrow I'll get to see your mom and all that stuff. So it creates a reason to bring them back here. So all that preparation doesn't completely go to a 1 to 2 level area of the game, and that's it.
Oh yeah, I mean that's why we're putting in a city, so that way we could have all sorts of encounters and adventures and stuff going on in here. So since this is where our adventure is going to go here, why don't we ask a question that's more pertinent to them directly? And that's, how does the city see adventurers, and how do the dwarves see adventurers?
Well, given that this is going to be the very beginning of our game, and also the very beginning for potentially new players, but also um, the very beginning of hopefully a long, drawn-out campaign, uh, setting a precedent on adventures being uh, misunderstood or mistrusted might produce aggravation and tension amongst the players, which is good if you have a lot of
I
like really
Yeah, I would say it's
experienced
based
players.
on how experienced your players are. Because yeah, if I was
Yeah,
a new player and everybody was standoffish, I'd be like, this game isn't very fun. But if I'm an experienced
yeah,
player and I know that this is what I'm getting into when I'm going into the game, like when I'm playing Dark Heresy, I know I'm going in like the Emperor is great. No heresy. Get those scum out of here, and like it. And the Inquisition takes all that super seriously. So like my character would too, and it would make sense that nobody would want to talk to you about demons anywhere in the 40K universe. Even
yep,
especially if you're Inquisition, because then you're a witness, and they got to just get rid of those. So yeah, nobody wants to do that. But in a D&D game with newer players, I'd say like yeah, let the NPCs like welcome the adventures. Let the dwarves welcome the
yeah.
adventures too, because they I would think they would see at the very least the adventures as a way to solve problems that they can throw money at, which they have a lot of, that doesn't endanger dwarven life.
Yep. Yeah, or also adventurers produce something very Shadowrun-esque in that they're expendable, whereas their guards and the training that their guards have had to go through is not as
Yeah, and these
expendable.
guys are basically volunteering for the job anyway because that's what they want to do. So it's just mutually beneficial. The adventurers get to adventure, and the dwarven oligarchy, I guess, gets to, uh, keep all their assets. Well, minus
Yeah.
some coin that the players would definitely want to get out of this.
Oh yeah, and considering it's the very beginning of the game, coin is going to be something that's hard to come across. So a nice little sweeten of the pot that to help them get ready for bigger, grander adventures might be a good way to go about it.
Yeah, I usually throw in an item as a reward too. Not like a magic item per se, but just something, just a little something, something to make
It's
it
like
more memorable.
this axe has been passed down through my family for generations. I'd like for you to have it. You've presented yourself with valor and a will of steel, and should be rewarded as such.
Yeah, exactly. That was a perfect example.
So now that we've got how they feel about homeboys,
Let's explore the places they're gonna go through, because we've already established that
yeah,
the architecture kind of melds together in how the styles are presented. But let's ask some other questions, like is obviously, other than the very center, we're just going to focus on the outer or the outside ring, because that's where the players are predominantly going to spend their initial time here, at least. Is this like dense city? Is this like maybe more suburban out here? or is I don't know, maybe it's like a more vertical city, or is it built in underground a little bit?
It could possibly be built a little bit underground. Like most of the levels are like basement, sub basement one, sub basement two, that kind of thing. But considering the fact that they're around the entrances to the city, there's large slums that have cropped up because of this disease problem that they're having to deal with. Because a disease like this would be an issue, it would be less of an issue if it were like open suburban area, but it would be a rampant problem that would need a solution quickly if it was a fairly dense city with buildings that are close together, very London-esque during the
Yeah.
plague, and that's
Oh,
part
yeah.
of
I
the
was
problem
I
that
was
you're running
imagining a
into.
London-esque kind of city. Is that what you were thinking? London? All right. Just
Yeah,
want to make
yeah,
sure.
yeah, London-ish, London or
So
Paris.
let me ask you something. Since this disease is going to be kind of the this seems like it's a crux, like a crucial point for maybe like the first arc of the campaign. Like it's probably going to
Okay.
lead up to solving this disease because we talked about it a lot already. So it really sounds like it's solidifying itself into our setting. Now,
All
does the
right.
city quarantine anyone, or like if as long as it's not affecting the dwarves, do they just let the everybody else do whatever, or do they even know that quarantining a thing, if everybody is even viable? Like, do they know about microorganisms?
Because this is high magic, it's likely that high science is not going to be a thing. Because if you have something to solve a problem
Yeah,
that's of magical nature, you don't really develop the technology to deal with
yeah.
things
As
that you
far as
can't deal with.
anybody's concerned, all they have to do is say some words and touch somebody, and then like they feel better, and like that
Yeah.
works. We don't really need to find out why.
Because it's high magic, it's likely that there would probably be quite a few uh, dudes and or dudettes that would have the ability, like paladins, to do lay on hands or
Oh, I
cure
got it.
illnesses or
So you
whatever system
mentioned
you want to use.
there were temples to various things earlier. So how about
Hmm.
those are acting as the central points of people getting healed? But unfortunately, despite the amount of healers, which in any other setting would appear quite great, the disease is just spreading so quickly, and somehow people are getting reinfected. Like they're not able to, build their immune systems can't do anything about it, so they're like getting afflicted more than one time.
Instead of it being like a naturally occurring disease, which magic would definitely be able to take care of, the problem that they're running into is that it can be cured, but it doesn't always work because the disease also carries magical properties that is
Ooh,
causing it
I
in the
have an
first
idea. What
place.
if what if when you use those curing spells, it doesn't actually cure the disease, it just suppresses it back to like 1%, and then it just grows until what, you die? Is what happens when it hits 100?
Given that the characters are level ones, making it something so
Well, it doesn't
vicious
have to be
that
fast
in the
acting. It
course
could
of
just
10,
take a while. Like maybe when you're at
yeah,
1%, you have like 2 months to live. Like something crazy like that. So it's not like people are dying in droves, but there's enough people dying and it's spreading fast enough that it is definitely like on everyone's mind.
okay, all right, that's good, and also would present the opportunity that there's plenty of time in play if one of the players were to get sick, would
Yeah, they
be
don't have
able
to
to
scramble
find
and
the
just
cure.
like grab at straws
Yeah.
right out the gate. They could take their time. There's still obviously the urgency to it, but
Yeah,
yeah, they don't have to like worry about losing their character to the disease unless they like really slack off.
and ignore it completely. Yeah. So the first couple of levels of the characters could very well be just the quest that has been given to them because all of the adventurers that would normally come into the city via the mountains, because they know there's a disease here, none of the adventurers are willing to come out to help. And the king is basically like, all right, look, any adventurers, please come to us. We'll pay you to deal with this. And because it's so urgent, the the there would probably be like a bulletin
Well,
board or a
yeah, there'd probably be
postage that
shit
says,
everywhere. That'd probably be like almost the
yeah,
only thing people are talking about if it's reached such a degree.
the first likely place that they would be able to start would probably be like a temple or something like that to one of the
Yeah,
gods
like
that has been
you'd
trying
be
to
able to
cure it.
find like connections to your characters and what religion they follow.
Hmm.
You'd be able to set up an easy like quest giver because the exhausted healer who's working the temple and running out of spell slots basically within 10 minutes of each day is pretty excited that somebody could like deal with this. You could also consider, depending on how you want to roll with this, maybe making a character or all of your characters immune to this disease, thus making them extremely valuable. Uh,
Mm. Well, it could very well be that the player characters are um, they come from a certain place, or it could be that it's only
yeah,
affecting the dwarves.
it could be like a
And because
grudge that somebody like magically set up, so that way it would get back at them for something. It's like some slight, whether it's
mhm.
petty or like a legitimate grievance. Then they're just like, nah, I hate them all. Get rid of them.
Yeah, so any of the dwarves that live in the city uh, are the only ones that are being affected, but the elves and the humans and the halflings are not. It could have been a gnome that did it. Was really upset that they weren't allowed into the city because fuck
Get out of
gnomes.
here, gnomes! I'll show you. And then he creates like the greatest biological weapon that the world has ever known.
All right, so it's they do uh, if they are a dwarf though, they have the ability to actually catch this thing. So
So
that leaves a
you could
couple
also
things
just
too.
not tell them that that might even be a mechanic, and just I mean
Oh
let them
yeah.
think that they could all be infected at any time, and then like somebody's like trips and falls in like I don't know, some disease mush or whatever, and they're like, oh no, I'm gonna contract it, and turns out they're immune, and they're just like worried for no reason. But they don't immediately know that. It's not like they're like, yes, I know I am immune to this disease I have never heard about before.
Yeah. Oh, you could we could make it like a double-edged sword thing. Like there was a large celebration here recently where the people of the town partook in one of the things that they always partake in, i.e. clams, and the guy knowing that this place revolves around those things made the disease carried by the clams that these people have been eating, and so all of the clams have been destroyed. They've been they're only being gathered for the resources they create, not the food. It's put a strain on the purse of the city itself because you can't feed people the things that you had before because now it's causing them to get sick and
Ah,
die.
yeah. You could
But
also represent this as
because
an
they know
obvious
that,
in-play thing, as like maybe you see an excessive amount of clamshells that are like being shipped out of the town, like to some burning field or something down south, and
yeah, and large containers just full of clam meat that smells fine. It looks okay, but something must be
yeah, or you
wrong
could
with it.
see that they're importing food from maybe this. Actually, no, the desert to the west is poor as crap. So how about some? Maybe
Yeah.
there's something to the north or south. We don't even have to like say definitively yes or no, but they're just importing food from somewhere because they have to at this point.
Mm-hmm. All right. So there's a rampant disease that's affecting people. Let's say the one of the clergymen that has been taking care of people and basically manually resetting their "I'm gonna die" clocks back to day one of X number of days. Um, they could have been poring over notes and texts about magical things and diseases and can't really combine the two. But they did hear that a traveler had came from the south that had said something similar had happened to the city that he grew up in when he was young, and the only one that knows about it is this old hermit who lives in the mountains just to the west of this place, and it sets them on their first quest to go and try and retrieve this antidote and this curative from another location to bring back.
Alternatively, just kind of expanding on that, not changing it too much, but instead of having some guy come from the south, maybe your druid or your one of your players has medical knowledge
Ooh.
and has experienced this before, so when they get into town, like maybe they roll a perception check and see some guy who's like passed out like in an alleyway and recognize like the scarring on his skin or something like that, and then like she thinks, oh no, this not
Not
here,
here.
and maybe she doesn't know how to make the
Oh.
antidote. Like maybe you can only get like the herb or something from this guy that you got to go see that you've come up with, this elder or whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
and that gives, if that character is even a part of the druid's backstory, then that's a good reason to involve the players and also set them on a
Oh
quest.
yeah. Yeah. And they're personally invested in it, as well as the rulers of this place would be like, wait, you know about this? You know how to fix it? We have no idea.
Yeah.
You know how to do this? That instantly makes that player
That's right. It
valuable.
also, like, if they need to do any negotiation, they could use that as a kind of a bargaining chip, because
Oh
like
yeah.
they're gonna ask for more cash because players always ask for more cash, and when they do, not if, then if they roll to do that, then if they maybe say like, yeah, but we already know where this guy is, then they get advantage on the roll and they have a better chance of
Yeah.
succeeding at it. Um, and then maybe they could even use that same bargaining chip to get like supplies out of the dwarves, because it's a lot cheaper to give somebody a handful of torches, a backpack, and like some rations than it is to try to keep healing an entire city on a mostly day-to-day basis.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. But because that will cure the problem, but it won't fix the clams, that sets up the opportunity for the second quest that they go on to figure out what has caused this in the clams in the first place, and then take care of that so that their food source can then again be returned,
And what I,
which
and
could
I've
take
set this whole
longer.
thing up like from the very beginning as an excuse for Xander to lead himself into going into the water where I'm going to kill him with fish.
Oh
Because
no,
in the
fucking
end, you've
fish.
just dove yourself, Xander, into this sea to take on these clams and whatever problems their disease has. So you will get speared by a variety of marine life.
Oh, why is it always marine life trying to kill me? Ugh.
But
Swim
but
speed be
seriously, yes,
damned.
that's a great idea of like expanding on this quest chain, because you have like a real it doesn't have to be easy or uninteresting kind of fetch quest that you're going to get this antidote. Because you could do all sorts of stuff along the way of this journey. Like you could have good camping scenes. You could use random encounters. This is a perfect time for that. Just to have
Oh
like a
yeah.
couple fights if you've been primarily like doing a lot of speaking or just role playing and not a lot of action. That's not to say like you have to force action on your players, but D&D predominantly is just a fighting game. So you want to let
Effectively.
people use the mechanics that the game is primarily built around. If they're
Mhm.
like really into, just a side note, if they're really into like a role play scene, unless it is imperative to your story to interrupt them with something happening, then you could just let that play out, and you don't even have to like do combat or anything. But just a side note. Uh, so yes, going back into the next part of the quest where they figure out what's up with the clams. Yeah, that'll allow the players to figure out how they're going to deal with that section, because they can't breathe underwater, probably. I don't know. I can't. Don't quote me on your players. They might have come up with something weird.
Yep. Like gillyweed.
Yeah. So they probably can't breathe underwater. They don't exactly know what is like the source of what's going on is. What
Yeah.
Xander? What is the source? What are they eventually going to find? Maybe like on the third part of this quest in this arc.
Well, the second one will reveal to them that the clams themselves aren't actually being affected. It's just because they breathe the water. The people are starting to get sick again, and they've
Oh
stopped
yeah,
eating the
the
clams, and they
clams
don't
are
know
filter
why.
feeding, and they're filtering the toxins, and yeah,
Out of the water. And
which is just
so
carrying
what it
them.
is, the island where the rocks are, there's another island just to the south of it where a very uh, both mysterious and mischievous uh, owner of this old spoopy castle has suddenly come into residence, and he's been dumping this magical crap into the water to
All right, so we got
basically
magic
kill off.
sewage. being
Mm-hmm.
dumped into
Magic
the
sewage.
ocean.
Yeah, it could also very just as well be a kind of ambiguous thing. Like he doesn't know that it's causing this, so it's not like he's trying to slight them. He knows that they're having a problem, but he's not really affected by it. And because he's been raising sheep on his thing, but he's been dumping the stuff into the water just because that's what you do. And he comes to find out, well, shit, I can't do that anymore. How do I take care of this stuff? And so that brings into another quest chain, and it just keep going and
Or
going
you
and
could,
going.
what I would say is like for like the first quest arc, like you could probably stop it at the guy who is dumping the shit. And with I'd say for like newer players or hell, I think this would just be more interesting in general for anybody. I think that for this first quest, this guy should totally know that it's causing these problems. This guy should actively be like,
Yeah,
maybe this is a byproduct of something else that also evil that he's doing. But it leads to a good boss encounter, and then the players get to fight something that's clearly evil, and then they
clearly.
get to just beat the shit out of this guy. And I mean, it's not out of the question that they either kill him or they can arrest him too. So like
Yep.
there might be a maybe after they find out that this guy's the source of it, the city posts like a bounty against this guy. It's like dead or alive, he's causing all sorts of problems. And since he's kind of a
Yep.
more powerful dude, not like a level 1 guy, but maybe the characters are like level 2, maybe right at level 3. And
Yeah.
like this is just kind of maybe a mini boss or a full boss where it's just this guy is clearly more powerful. The town just can't handle him, and this is why adventurers are needed.
Yep. And then when they finally deal with the guy, he's been using this stuff that is a magical byproduct of another thing that he's doing for another bigger, badder guy elsewhere, and they're starting to see the links in the chain going
See,
on up.
I kind of don't like putting so many links so soon. This is my own personal way I GM, so I'm not saying you're wrong, Xander, but I like to kind of disconnect after the first big event. Not like write it off like it's a thing that didn't matter. I'm not talking that level, but maybe they find like just a small thing. Maybe they find in this guy's diary a reference to something that's on like in the desert to the west there, and that gives them an excuse eventually
Yeah.
to go over there. Maybe they're not going to go over there now. This way they know that there's something more, but they're not like stuck on the same quest, because sometimes that like the same kind of quest chain might feel samey even if you're providing a lot of variety in terms of that
Yeah.
context. I like just being able to spread out a little bit because kind of like in real life, maybe not everything is as connected as you think it would be.
Yeah.
Maybe the wagon turned over on the side of the road is unrelated to the disease, but maybe there's a bandit problem or something else that's going on out there.
Yeah.
Um,
Or just it's the small piece that will, as they go on other adventures, they'll gather more pieces that then lead them into the big quest. Kind of like with the Harvester
yeah, I
Eyes
like
thing.
having a thing that players can go after. It might not be like a valuable thing or maybe even a physical object, but like just an objective. So they always have in their minds like, yeah, we're on the lookout for these things, but we're not actively searching for them yet. Or if we are, then we at least know what we're looking for, and we can we could ask for like evidence on where it is. Roll investigation to see if they can find any information about whatever this is in the local library, just whatever it is. Because I usually do use physical objects a lot of times because then it's an item that the players have and they can put in their inventories, and so they can keep track of it and who has what and everything. But maybe you can give
Yeah.
whatever this object is some kind of minor benefit or maybe a minor power. With the Harvester Eyes that Xander mentioned, those were like a double-edged sword because when you used one, you can gain glimpses and visions of where the nearest one was, but whoever was holding it, the one that you just basically scanned, was the also could get visions of yours. So you didn't really just want to use it all willy-nilly, because yeah,
Like
you would
I
be
did.
giving your enemy as much information. Well, maybe not as much, but close to enough as you have. And then that like tips them
Yeah.
off, and you don't want to get like pull too much attention to yourself unless you're trying to get that attention, like when you fought Chrysodune, which was pretty awesome. Yeah,
The
he
first
was
time.
like, "Hey, bro, we're over here. Come
Bad,
get
bad
us."
plan.
That was a great plan. It didn't work out as well as you'd hoped, but it was a good plan.
Yeah, it also didn't work out for one character, i.e., they died actually, and didn't work out for my character because I died and then saw
Yep.
God.
So
Yeah,
speaking
be
of those
careful.
two things, God and the next part of what we're going to be talking about, just some basic laws for what's going on here, like in the city. So we've established like some adventuring points, but now we got to figure out how the players should act while they're in the city, because it's important to always keep the players in mind for why you're developing each of these things, because if they have to interact with it in some way or another, even if it's just like a
Yeah.
passing like passive perception thing that they notice. Like it informs their decisions. So with some laws, let's just come up with some real basic stuff. Just draft up some shit.
Because the city is currently in turmoil because of all of the disease and everything, it's likely that they would have enacted some kind of martial law to try and keep the peace. Because in times of great catastrophe, there's also great crime and great looting.
Oh, and
So
we've determined
maybe
that
when
there
they
is
walk
great
up,
crime going on.
yep. So when they walk up, the guards at the gate say you have to surrender all of your weapons when you enter this city, because
That might be
there's been a
that might
amount
be a
of
little
deaths.
extreme for this beginning thing. So how about instead of we're trying to take away the players' weapons, let's say the gates are closed, and the players have to convince the guy at the gate who's like looking down at them, like the French dude at the beginning of Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Told you a second
Like
time.
they have to convince him to let them in. And maybe they won't take away the weapons because like it's a fantasy world. I think everybody understands like people need to be armed because you will get shanked in an alleyway. So I don't think taking away their weapons is almost ever a good option in any game, except for the very specific instance of like this is mostly Shadowrun I'd use this for, a meeting between like crime bosses where they have like the highest ups in like one room, they're passing the sake around, and then the guards who are armed like outside, and to get into that room then you'd have to be disarmed. But other than that, I'd say the players should don't take this shit away too much. But so they're kind of on a martial law and they're kind of on lockdown. But when the players get inside, what can they expect to do? Like, how should they act? When I'm saying basic laws, like if the city was operating properly, what kind of laws would they have?
Well, with the basics, don't take nobody's shit, don't cut
No
nobody's
taking,
throat,
no
and
stabbing.
there would, because it's a larger city, there might be some kind of tax for going into the city itself to
Taxes.
try and keep the walls. It could be also that any foods and things like that, because they're
Food has to
in
be
a food has to be checked to make sure it's not
Yeah,
contaminated.
so that's a way to have your players go through a checkpoint without like taking away their shit.
Yeah.
So let's say what? How about are the players allowed in the center ring? Is anyone allowed in the center ring?
I would say that they would not be allowed in the center ring without
Or
an
unless they were a
invitation.
dwarf. I'd say the
Or if
dwarves,
they're a
if
dwarf.
your players had one, or all of them, I guess they should get a special pass and get in there because you got to give a
Yeah.
little something to your players every now and then. And it doesn't always have to be equal because I like distributing a little bit of things here and there for each person. They might not all get the same thing, but they're all going to get a little something every now and then.
It could also be that certain activities have been disallowed, like where in most of the most other places you could find like a brothel or things like that, but in this particular city, it's considered a crime
To brothel side,
to sell
okay,
sex
no brothels.
to brothel side. So maybe that
All right,
is
so they won't
a
find
thing
brothels.
that's well posted.
Let's see. Maybe like sewage and trash has to be handled with care. How about that? So that way the
Ooh,
players
yeah.
can't just like throw shit away. Like they might get fined or arrested because like that could be spreading the disease. Something for them to keep in mind, but not something that would ultimately cripple them. And that would
Okay.
be appropriate for the setting. That should go without saying, but yeah.
Yeah. It could also be that any new people that come into the city have to be given a full physical
Yeah,
examination
they have to
because of the
sign a
thing.
registry or something
Um,
too.
yeah, they have to let them know where they're going to be staying, and because they're outsiders that are armed, maybe they are required to have an escort or something like that.
Yeah, I'd say that depends on how like freeform your players want to be. Because if they kind of like a more railroady experience, I'd say you could do the escort thing because then you could lead them to where you want them to go. If they are more freeform, then I would say don't implement that. Because ultimately we're making a game here. So as realistic as all
Yeah,
this would be, we don't want to bog down the players with the realism that they would have to be irritated at in real life if it were to actually happen. So we these are
yeah,
good ideas, and I love listening to them. But like ultimately, since the players are going to be playing through this, and you don't want to have to narrate going through this whole process. At least I don't. You might.
yeah. Like I like things like that because it gives the opportunity. Like if they are required to have an escort, but their escort limits them from going to a certain part of the city because that's where the thing is, but that's where their brother lives. It creates a kind of opportunity to do a stealth
Yeah,
mission.
I guess. But thinking as a player, I'm seeing a lot of roadblocks just from that perspective, and you
Yeah.
don't want to put too many of those because what really separates video games from tabletop games is tabletop games don't really have all the roadblocks that we have to deal with in pretty much every other facet of reality. I would say like you could describe all of this as a kind of a cutscene where the players are going through this checkpoint. There's just like brief instances of where their food is getting looked at, where somebody's getting viewed magically, like, and to make sure that they're disease free. Maybe there's like somebody, yeah, you have somebody. Oh, the same character that you just mentioned a second ago. They roll investigation, so they're chatting up the healers as they're going through because they're people too. So they're just like, yeah, it's just another day for me. Just yeah, you're good. Go on to the next guy. Hey, did you hear about this thing that happened? Or as they're like, talking, maybe they find out about like, hey, my brother lives here and he's in this part of town. And then over the course of the discussion and this like investigation role, that's how they figure out it's like, oh, we're not supposed to go there, are we? And then you can produce the stealth mission
Yeah.
without making it seem like you're pushing the stealth mission at the players.
All right. All right.
Because it might not
Cool.
even interest your whole party. It might only be interesting to that one person, which still let them interact with like this brother character and the stealth mission. But if you're don't push it too hard if it's only really going to be one person who gives a damn.
All right. All right. Sounds
So
cool.
finally, let's talk about just the basics of the religions, and then we're going to call it for this episode. So we've already established that there's a pantheon to some degree. We don't know like how large it is, but this is what you wanted for the setting.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, that's classic in fantasy and pretty much all mythology. So yeah, we'll stick with a good old pantheon. Now these gods, I know it seems like we suddenly took a turn into top down, but this actually still is bottom up. And the reason why is because we're not setting hard limits to stuff yet.
We're not even giving
Yeah,
them
we're not even
names
sure
yet.
how many there are. But we're just kind of establishing how the city is laid out with these guys. So there are multiple temples. Would you say that there are greater or less than 10 gods?
I'd say less than 10. Don't want to bog the players down with that kind of info. At least right now. Each area that they go to could have different gods, a completely separate pantheon, for all they know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's good. Right. We haven't even established that these gods are real or and can affect any real change, or if all of the divine magic that people think they're using is actually from a different source. But we'll get into that later. That's a complicated question, which is why top down its own beast to deal with.
Yep.
So we have a bunch of gods, which explains why there's so many temples. We've also tied it in with why, even though there are a lot of temples, they can't handle the amount of disease that's coming through them. Because there's just not that many temples. There are a bunch, but it's not crazy.
And and it's not a cure. It's just a reset.
Now, how invested are the people in this city to this religion or multiple religions?
I would say that there's one that gains the most traction and has the most temples. I would say it would likely either be a a god of the dwarves regarding like wealth and mining and things like that, but could also be a god of like the sea, like because they're on a coast, so they get a lot of sea
So
weather
we can actually
and
establish a
things like
god
that.
here, and then as we don't have to limit it to just this one. But for now, we're just gonna have this one guy here, or one lady, or one amorphous nightmare blob, whatever you choose. All right, so let's say how does this god, like, what's it affect? What does it affect? Is it is it the dwarven god? Is it only the strongest because of, or like maybe I don't want to go too deep in a top down question like this, but on a metaphysical level, does the god get more power the more it's worshipped?
I'd say that's a blanket yes. It's just easier to do that.
More power with worship. Okay, yeah, it's pretty easy. So yeah, we've established kind of a high end thing here, but that was kind of needed. And I've always said, even though we're focusing on the bottom up, you could switch back and forth using whatever method you want. You don't have to stick to as strictly like zoomed like in as I have been. Typically, when I'm doing this myself, I jump around and answer multiple questions as I'm going
Oh
along.
yeah.
This is the bottom up structure that we're presenting is only to help you get some great ideas and to just give you the tool set you need to like make up your own stuff, because the stuff that you make up is going to be awesome for your players.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we have
So is it the god
one
of
god
dwarves?
who's
Maybe the god of dwarves is the god of the sea.
well, I would yeah, I'd say the dwarven god of the sea. There you go. Let's say it's a she.
Mm-hmm.
She is a merciful
Merciful. All
goddess.
right. So so automatically we know that this religion, it practices like merciful things, whatever you happen to define those are as. So that seems to kind of cut in on the edge that we gave these dwarves, though, because they kind of keep to themselves and they don't seem to give two shits about other people.
Mm. Well, because the dwarves benefit so much from this sea thing, they also do the they worship because of that. Everybody else has just kind of picked it up because they're the ones that worship it, and that's the temples they had first.
Right, but I was more getting at like why would if the dwarves are supposed to be following a merciful god, why would they wall themselves off to such a degree, and like why
Oh,
they
right.
would even like hate the other, even gnomes that we've decided for some reason, why they would hate gnomes to begin with if they are worshiping this like what I assume is a lawful good merciful god.
That's actually an interesting question.
We could expand like the domains that she has. So she could be merciful, but she could also like embody some kind of like survival of the fittest thing, where it's
Ah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, the dwarves are on top because they know how to handle shit. And if one of their guys falls in a mine shaft, they're not going to leave him for dead, but because they know he's tough shit already. But sometimes you need a little help, and that's what when the mercy comes in. Or like
Yeah.
you've downed an enemy, like you're gonna go in for the killing blow, but like you don't have to because this prey is beneath you, and like you're gonna show mercy in that it lives and goes to tell its homies that don't mess with you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So multiple domains. I like that one. Let's give her a name.
All right,
Ooh. How about Kruana?
how do you spell that?
Kruana.
Kurwana. Okay, I'm good with that.
All right. And she is the dwarven goddess of the seas.
Okay, yeah, I already have that written down. Since we've already figured out this is Dungeons and Dragons, we could go ahead and give her an alignment. Are we gonna do it with lawful good or something else?
I would say
Neutral
neutral
good.
good.
All right.
Yeah. She can go either lawful or chaotic depending on because the winds and the sea and the storms and
Yeah,
things like
it all
that is
moves
when
in
she's
patterns, but a lot those patterns can be unpredictable.
yeah.
All right, yeah. So that's the main religion that we have for the what the fuck is this place called? City of the Iron Coast.
Yeah, there we go.
And so we've established a centerpiece in our campaign. A city is a good place to start, considering there's just so much that could take place within it. Even just from seeing what we've come up with within this hour. You can add almost anything and find a way to make it fit properly within your setting by using this large town or city as the first big place to focus your creative attention. Thank you all for listening. If you liked what you heard or want to learn more about being a good game master, subscribe to Starblade Studios for more podcast and gaming shit, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
Later, man.